passion. Chalk in hand, he's on a mission, shaping dreams with precision. Joseph, the English teacher.
Hi everyone, this podcast is for radio professionals and podcasters who are looking to use their voice differently to get their message across. Let's begin. One of the most important things when you're podcasting or doing a radio broadcast is knowing how you feel. In English, there is an idiom, knowledge is power, and knowing how you feel in the beginning helps you to avoid bringing your mood to audio. So if you're recording something, if you're reading the news, you don't want your mood to be in the middle of that. Okay? For example, I'm just going to give you a few headlines here. For example, the Queen has died at her home in Scotland. Now you can see there, very sad tone coming in. But if I was stressed, that might sound something like, the Queen has died in her home in Scotland as well. And you can see that I'm distracted there. I'm looking around. You can hear in my breath. It's not quite right. So the very first thing you need to consider is your mood and how you feel. Because no matter what you do, if you're not an industry professional, you're not going to know how to mask what you're trying to say. We're able to mask our own feelings by using intonation, but it takes a lot of practice to get to that point. So the very first piece of advice is your own personal feelings, how to avoid them, how to utilize them. Because if you have a lot of energy, you can energy build. If your day has been full of caffeine drinks, then it is possible that you can use that to your advantage. You can imagine, and we've all had those very dynamic news headlines where the music is beating, and then there's a kind of an explosion of sound. Other news today, Donald Trump visits Scotland. The Queen dies at her home in Balmoral. The situation in the Middle East erupts again. Now, for these news headlines in depth. If you're the kind of person who has a lot of energy, you can energy build reading the news and capturing that mood that you have. But it's very important to be aware of what that mood is if you're going to utilize it. What you don't want is a podcast. Hello, well, welcome again to my podcast. I'm Joseph, and yada yada, blah. So you have to get the mood right. You also have to know what kind of mood you want your program to have. Are you reading the news, for example? Does it require you to be asking in-depth questions? Well, there might be a lot of stress. And again, you need to know how to use that in order to set the mood. Now, let's just think of a few different scenarios, okay? So you have a radio show, okay? And that radio show is a mixture of special guests. You have to decide whether you want it to be serious, whether you want it to be funny, whether you want it to be a mixture. And if you're playing music, of course, the music has to reflect or even allow the music to lift the mood. But your voice and your presentation has to kind of match that. Now, historically, in UK radio, what they did was the presenters used to completely shut down their own feelings in order to move forward with the show. So the show had its mood and its music. The presenter would be into that, but you never really got to hear how they really were. In later years, I would say from the 1980s, maybe more in the 1990s, we had what was called shock radio, where the presenters would come with a very strong personal opinion on particular topics. A few of them are still around. They often have very strong political views about what Britain should be. And if anyone disagrees with them on a call-in show, they just cut them off, you know. And those people, a lot of people liked them and a lot of people didn't. And they're kind of declining now in radio because they're not so popular as they once were. But the idea is this, and that is that you are bringing whatever mood you want to your show. And these days of podcasting and YouTubing and these things, you can create whatever mood you think is necessary. Now, let's just have a look at a few examples of how you can present things. Now, these are stories, but the same rule applies. You can stress certain words, or you can maybe highlight certain issues that you feel about. If you don't do that, it might just sound a bit like this. And if you're not a native speaker, it's possible that you haven't been able to examine the power of your voice. Let's have a look at some headlines. Right, so this is my site. Now let's just have a look at a few of the headlines that I've been posting over the last few days. Okay, so this is a fictional story I've been producing. Now, how would you present this? Well, there's a choice. If it's a sad story, Neil McTaggart's Crossing, a story of 1920s Scottish immigration to Canada. So if I was perhaps doing a podcast or a news story about how sad immigration was in the 1920s, you can hear there that my voice is flat and I'm pulling my intonation down with every word. There's nothing going up. My intonation is my usual voice and down, not up. All right. But if I want to choose something happier, let's say, for example, here's a new song, Reach by Gloria Estefan, or Estefan, as she's known, I think. Reach by Gloria Estefan. You can hear there that there's an upward flow to my intonation. Also, looking back, Butte Pride 2019 and Glasgow Pride 2018. Scottish Pride photo memories. So I'm making this sound very happy. If I wanted it to be sad, maybe because something happened there, looking back, Butte Pride 2019 and Glasgow Pride 2018. Let's just go on. Here's a good example. Okay, so this is a self-help post about why some people are stuck in study mode. Now, if I read this, stop just learning, start giving, why you're stuck in study mode, it doesn't really reflect what I'm trying to say. In this case, as you can hear, I'm still pulling my intonation down, when really I want to put it up. Stop just learning, start giving, why you're stuck in study mode. So by putting my intonation up and down to my usual voice, it works really, really well because you can hear it sounds happier. And you can also use this intonation way to mask how you're really feeling. This is often used by business professionals as well, because they, of course, are trying to sell you something. So they're trying to mask their own feelings by using intonation. So you have to be careful. This can be quite abusive because you could be being misled. But if you're in touch with your feelings and you are presenting, these tips are incredibly powerful. And here are my video clips from the Netherlands when I was there a few weeks ago. So again, you can hear putting my intonation up and down really helps. Now, how does this help you with presenting and podcasting? Let's talk a little bit more about that. Right. Well, as I said a moment ago, the first and most important thing is to know how you feel, because you're going to be transmitting that on to whatever you're trying to produce. So you have to really make sure that either your mood is okay or that professionally you're able to cover it by masking how you're really feeling. What you don't want is going to a presentation, scratching your head and thinking, you know, I have to give this presentation, but I just had such a terrible argument with my wife this morning. That's, in fact, in a presentation, depending, of course, on what the presentation is, you might want to just cancel if you're not able to deal with that, unless you're trained to give that presentation to the best of your ability. Because whatever's going on for you, people will pick it up. They will hear that. So authenticity and honesty with yourself about how you're feeling is really, really important. For me personally, I like to take a couple of hours of silence before I do any podcast or radio broadcast, just to make sure my mood is okay. If I don't get that, or if there's anything going on in my personal life, I can mask it by using intonation. And if you're presenting a news program, that's incredibly easy to do, because usually with news programs, you don't bring your personal energy. You just read what's on the screen professionally, quietly, and very, very well. Maybe a really good example of what we're talking about is by comparing your voice to music. Think of classical music with all of its ups and downs, where it's not violent, it's not imposing. Think of how BBC newsreaders read the news. It's very, very similar. Then, of course, if you think of a rock track where the energy is building and you're getting ready for the headlines, and the jingle comes in, and each headline has a little explosion. So the first one, President Trump visits Scotland today. The Middle East, the situation worsens. So you can hear there the energy is building. If you're the kind of person who has a lot of energy, you can utilize this and bring it to your podcast. You would have to know, of course, exactly when your energy peaks and the best time to capture that. But more importantly is to know how to remain calm, especially if you're reading news, current affairs, also religious programming. And I say that because these things demand something which is higher than your personality. So news, religious programming, you don't really want to bring too much of you into that, because you're highlighting the story or the belief that you're bringing, not you. So it's incredibly ethical, and that's really important. So just to recap then, number one, your mood and what you're bringing, that's really, really important. Number two, the mood that you want to put on your podcast. If it's a chat show, for example, you may already want to, well, you might want to decide if you want it to be a bit edgy. Like if you watch, for example, some of the BBC's political shows, there's one presenter called, I think, Laura Kusenberg on a Sunday morning, where she just attacks everyone. That's her way. That's what she does, you know. She makes a living out of being aggressive with people. And of course, people like that because they want to see politicians squirming and being forced to give answers. Not very ethical, in my opinion, but if that's what you're trying to do, you have to plan it in advance. The questions you're going to ask, the tone you're going to take, how dramatic you're going to be. Some people are like that. I don't recommend that with news, politics, or current affairs because you could easily inflame people and make them very, very angry. So, how you feel and the mood that you're bringing to the podcast are two very, very important things. Although some things should be static, particularly news, unless you really want to get involved and give your personal opinion about the news. In which case, it's not a news program, it's a you program. So just something to keep in mind. If you are radio broadcasting, giving a presentation in the next few days, remember intonation is really important. You can make or break people by dragging them down to your level. Oh, I was on the metro the other day and this terrible thing happened, and then I had a fight with the ticket inspector because I lost my ticket. You know, you can hear the emotion there, but remember, people may well be copying you because some people, they just pick up other people's feelings. Alternatively, you could be talking joyfully about your holiday or about how great the town looks today. So it's incredibly powerful what you're doing. And remember, your voice can reflect a lot of things. And if it's going to reflect you, make sure that it's an authentic, honest version of who you are. See you. Bye.